Aisha never imagined she would end up in court that day. The morning had started like any other. She woke up at 5:30 a.m., said her prayers, prepared breakfast for her aging father, and got ready for another day at the elementary school library, where she had worked for the past 12 years. Her routine was simple but fulfilling. The children loved her storytelling sessions, and she took pride in keeping the small library organized and welcoming. That peaceful life shattered 3 weeks ago when she received the court summons. Her neighbor, Imran Malik, was suing her for property damage, specifically claiming that her modest garden renovation had somehow damaged his expensive drainage system and caused flooding on his sprawling property. "This is ridiculous," Aisha had whispered, her hands trembling as she read the document. Her garden renovation had consisted of nothing more than replacing some old roses with vegetables and adding a small stone path. She lived in a modest house inherited from her parents, now sandwiched between luxury homes as the neighborhood transformed. Imran Malik wasn't just any neighbor. His construction company had built most of the new housing developments springing up around the city. His face appeared on billboards, promising luxury living and modern amenities. Aisha had only spoken to him once, when his workers accidentally knocked down part of her fence. He had barely looked at her while promising it would be fixed. It never was. The lawsuit demanded 2.5 million rupees in damages. The sum made Aisha's stomach turn. Her annual salary was barely a fraction of that amount. She couldn't afford a lawyer, especially not one capable of going against Malik's team of legal experts. "Betty, don't worry," her father had said when she showed him the papers, using the affectionate term for daughter. Truth always wins in the end. Aisha wished she shared his confidence. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, she had called every affordable lawyer in the city. None would take her case when they heard who she was up against. One had laughed outright. "Fighting Malik Construction? You might as well throw your money into the river," he'd told her bluntly. With no other options, Aisha decided to represent herself. She spent nights after work researching basic legal procedures at the public library. The terminology confused her, the process intimidated her, but what choice did she have? The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with heavy rain clouds hanging over the city. Aisha dressed in her best shalwar kameez, a simple blue outfit she usually saved for special occasions. She pinned her hair back neatly and wore minimal makeup. She wanted to look respectable but not pretentious. Her father squeezed her hand before she left. "Remember who you are," he said simply. The courthouse was an imposing colonial-era building with high ceilings and long corridors that echoed with footsteps and whispers. Aisha clutched her folder of documents, feeling increasingly out of place as lawyers in crisp suits brushed past her. She had arrived an hour early out of nervousness and spent the time sitting on a wooden bench, rehearsing what she would say. When she finally entered courtroom 3, her confidence faltered. The room was larger than she had imagined, with polished wooden panels and stern portraits watching from the walls. Several people in expensive clothes sat in the front row, Malik's representatives, she assumed. Malik himself sat among them, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. Aisha took a seat in the back, trying to calm her racing heart. She watched as other cases were called before hers, observing how people addressed the judge, where they stood when they spoke. She scribbled quick notes, determined not to make basic mistakes. "Case number 247, Malik versus Khan," the court clerk finally announced. Aisha stood on shaky legs and made her way forward. As she passed the front row, she heard snickers. A young woman in designer clothes whispered something that made others laugh. Aisha kept her eyes straight ahead. The judge, a stern-looking man with salt and pepper hair, glanced at her briefly before turning to the imposing man who had risen from Malik's side. "This must be his lawyer. Counselor Ahmad representing the plaintiff, Your Honor," the man said smoothly. He was tall, with a perfectly tailored suit and confidence that seemed to fill the room. "And you are?" the judge asked, looking at Aisha with raised eyebrows. "Aisha Khan, Your Honor. I am representing myself." Her voice came out higher than normal. The judge frowned slightly. "Very well, Counselor Ahmad. Please proceed. The lawyer launched into a well-rehearsed speech, using technical terms that made Aisha's head spin. According to him, her unauthorized construction work had compromised the integrity of the adjoining property's drainage infrastructure, resulting in substantial water damage to Mr. Malik's award-winning landscape design and the foundation of his east wing. As he spoke, he presented glossy photographs of water pooling on marble floors and damaged garden features. Aisha knew these damages had nothing to do with her vegetable garden, but the lawyer connected them so convincingly that even she began to doubt herself. When it was her turn to speak, Aisha stepped forward with her folder. As she opened it, several papers slipped out, scattering across the floor. The courtroom fell silent as she scrambled to collect them, her face burning with embarrassment. "Ms. Khan, we don't have all day," the judge remarked sharply. Someone in the gallery laughed, then another, until a wave of poorly disguised chuckles rippled through the courtroom. Aisha finally gathered her documents and stood up, aware that her hands were visibly shaking. "Your Honor," she began, her voice barely audible. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Your Honor, I didn't cause this damage. My garden is small, and—" "Ms. Khan," the judge interrupted, "do you have any evidence to support your denial of the plaintiff's claims?" Aisha blinked. I have photos of my garden before and after the renovation." She fumbled with her phone, trying to find the pictures. "Proper evidence, Ms. Khan. Documented by professionals, not personal photographs," the judge clarified, impatience clear in his tone. From the corner of her eye, Aisha saw Malik whispering to his lawyer, both smiling slightly. She realized then that this hearing was merely a formality to them. They never expected her to put up a real fight. "Your Honor, I would like to request time to gather proper evidence," she said, suddenly remembering a phrase she had read during her research. The judge sighed. "Very well. The court will reconvene in 2 weeks. Ms. Khan, I strongly suggest you consider settling this matter before then. Mr. Malik has been generous in his demands considering the extent of the damages." Generous? The amount would bankrupt her. Aisha stood frozen as the judge moved on to the next case. She gathered her scattered papers with trembling hands and walked out, feeling the weight of eyes on her back. In the hallway, she overheard one of Malik's associates. "Did you see her face when she dropped everything?" "Like a scared rabbit. This will be over by next hearing." Aisha hurried outside, gulping the fresh air. Rain had started falling, but she barely noticed as she walked to the bus stop. The humiliation stung worse than she had imagined possible. They hadn't just dismissed her case, they had dismissed her as a person, as someone not even worth taking seriously. On the crowded bus ride home, pressed between strangers, a memory surfaced, one she had buried long ago. She remembered sitting in a university classroom surrounded by law textbooks, raising her hand to answer a complex question about property rights. Her professor had nodded approvingly at her response. "Excellent analysis, Ms. Khan. You have a natural affinity for the law." That was before her mother's illness, before the family needed her income more than she needed her education, before she packed away her law books and dreams of becoming an attorney. By the time Aisha reached her stop, the rain had soaked through her clothes, but something had changed inside her. The humiliation in the courtroom had cracked open a sealed part of herself. The part that had once excelled in legal studies. The part that recognized injustice and had wanted to fight it. Her father was waiting at the door, concern etched on his weathered face. "How did it go, Betty?" Aisha took a deep breath. "Not well, but it's not over." She walked past him to her bedroom and pulled a dusty box from under her bed. Inside were her old law textbooks, notebooks filled with her neat handwriting, and course materials she couldn't bear to throw away, despite abandoning that path. Running her fingers over a book on property law, Aisha made a decision. If Imran Malik and his lawyers wanted to humiliate her, to force her into paying for damage she didn't cause, they would soon discover they had underestimated the wrong woman. She might be just a librarian to them, but libraries were where knowledge lived, and knowledge properly applied was power. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. "Hello, Professor Rana. This is Aisha Khan. I was your student 8 years ago. I need your help." Professor Rana's voice had changed little in the 8 years since Aisha had last heard it, still warm but precise, like a well-tuned instrument. The retired law professor had been surprised to hear from his former student, but agreed to meet her the following day. "Bring everything related to the case," he told her. "And Aisha, I always wondered why you disappeared from my class. You were one of the brightest students I ever taught." That night, Aisha barely slept. She laid out her clothes for the next day. She had called in sick at the school library for the first time in 5 years and prepared questions for Professor Rana. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of standing in that courtroom again. But this time, she wasn't dropping papers or stumbling over words. The next morning, Aisha arrived at the small tea shop near the university where Professor Rana had suggested they meet. She spotted him immediately, his beard now fully white, but his posture still straight, his eyes alert behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when he saw her, greeting her with a warm smile. "You look exactly the same," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I feel different," Aisha replied honestly. Over steaming cups of chai, Aisha explained her situation, showing him the court documents, the photographs of her garden, and the ridiculous claims made by Malik Construction. Professor Rana listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. When she finished, including the humiliating court experience, he took off his glasses and polished them thoughtfully. "This is not just about your garden," he said finally. "Malik is building that new housing complex behind your neighborhood, correct?" Aisha nodded. "Crown Heights. The advertisements are everywhere. I've heard rumors about Malik Construction cutting corners on their drainage systems for years. A former student of mine works for the Environmental Protection Agency now. She mentioned investigations that somehow always get shut down before they go anywhere." He tapped his pen against his notebook. "Your small garden couldn't possibly cause the kind of damage they're claiming. They're using you as a scapegoat for their own failures." A mixture of anger and validation surged through Aisha. "So what do? I can't afford to fight them properly." Professor Rana smiled slightly. "You already know how to fight them. You just need to remember." He pulled a thick book from his bag and slid it across the table. "Property Law, 5th edition. Your copy, I believe. You left it in my office all those years ago." Aisha stared at the book, running her fingers over her name written inside the cover. "I can't possibly. You were 3 courses away from completing your law degree, Aisha. You had the highest grades in property law that I'd seen in 15 years of teaching." He leaned forward. "You don't need to hire a lawyer. You need to become the lawyer you were meant to be." For the next 10 days, Aisha lived a double life. At the school, she maintained her quiet efficiency, helping children find books and running her regular storytelling sessions. But evenings and nights belonged to her reawakened legal mind. Her small living room transformed into a war room. Property law books covered the dining table. Her cousin Farid, who worked at the university library, brought her academic journals and case studies on environmental regulations. She created a timeline of Malik Construction's projects and began researching their history of disputes. "Betty, you need to sleep," her father would say, finding her still awake at 2 in the morning, surrounded by papers. "Soon, Abu," she would reply, not looking up from her notes. Professor Rana introduced her to his former student Nadia, who now worked at the EPA. Over coffee in a quiet corner of a busy restaurant. "So no one sees us together," Nadia had insisted. The environmental officer confirmed Aisha's suspicions. "Malik Construction has been on our radar for years," Nadia explained in a low voice. "Their drainage systems don't meet code, but somehow they always pass inspection. We've had complaints from homeowners in 3 different developments, but the cases mysteriously get dropped or settled with confidentiality agreements. Can you get me those records?" Aisha asked. Nadia hesitated. "Officially, no. But there are some documents that are technically public record if someone knows exactly what to ask for." She slid a folded paper across the table. These file numbers. Request them from the Public Records Office. They'll tell you more. Armed with the file numbers, Aisha visited the records office during her lunch break. The clerk looked bored as she filled out the request forms, clearly not expecting a modestly dressed librarian to be requesting technical documents about construction permits and environmental compliance reports. What she found was exactly what she needed: a pattern of violations, warnings that were never followed up on, and inspections signed off by the same two officials across multiple projects. But Aisha knew documents alone wouldn't be enough. She needed witnesses, people who could testify about what was really happening at Malik Construction. This proved more challenging. Former employees were either unreachable or unwilling to talk. "Nobody wants to go against Malik," explained one contractor who agreed to meet her briefly in a coffee shop before changing his mind and leaving without ordering. "He has friends in high places." Frustrated but determined, Aisha decided on a different approach. If current employees wouldn't talk, perhaps past ones would. She spent hours searching social media profiles, identifying people who had listed Malik Construction as a previous employer. She sent dozens of messages, most unanswered. Then, just 5 days before the hearing, she received a reply from someone named Hassan, a former site manager who had moved to Dubai 2 years ago. "I have nothing to lose by talking," he wrote. "Malik fired me when I raised concerns about the substandard materials they were using for the storm drains in Emerald Villas. I have documentation." Hassan connected her with 2 other former employees who were willing to provide sworn statements. One had been a purchasing manager who kept copies of orders showing how specifications were changed to cheaper materials after permits were approved. Another had been a junior engineer who had documented safety concerns that were ignored. The night before the hearing, Aisha sat at her kitchen table putting the final touches on her presentation. Her father brought her a cup of tea and sat across from her. "You remind me of your mother right now," he said softly. "She had that same look when she was fighting for something she believed in." Aisha looked up, surprised. Her mother had been a quiet homemaker in her memories. "Your mother was studying to be a teacher when we got married," he continued. "She put it aside to raise you, but she never lost that fire in her eyes. Before she got sick, she was running literacy classes for the neighborhood women from our living room." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Some dreams just wait for the right time." Aisha squeezed back, tears threatening. "I'm scared, Abu. What if I make a fool of myself again?" "Then you will get up and try again," he said simply. "But I don't think you will. I've watched you these past weeks. You've come alive in a way I haven't seen since you left university." Aisha barely slept that night, going over arguments in her head. She'd arranged for one of the former employees to video call into the hearing from Dubai. The other 2 had provided notarized statements. She had compiled public records showing the pattern of violations. She had photographs from neighbors in other Malik developments showing similar drainage issues. Most importantly, she had analyzed the drainage paths in her neighborhood using topographical maps and rainfall data, proving that water from her small garden couldn't possibly flow toward Malik's property. It was physically impossible given the land elevation. As dawn broke, Aisha dressed carefully in a simple but professional outfit: navy blue shalwar kameez with minimal embroidery, her mother's small pearl earrings and low heels. She pulled her hair back in a neat bun and applied light makeup. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself, not because of her appearance, but because of the confidence in her eyes. Her father was waiting with breakfast, but Aisha could only manage a few bites. "Whatever happens today," he said as she gathered her materials, now neatly organized in a borrowed leather portfolio, "I am proud of you." The bus ride to the courthouse felt different this time. Instead of anxiety knotting her stomach, Aisha felt a strange calm. She had done everything possible to prepare. She knew the law, she had the evidence, and most importantly, she had rediscovered a part of herself, long buried. As she climbed the courthouse steps, she noticed a small group waiting near the entrance: her cousin Fareed, Professor Rana, and 3 women from the school where she worked. They had come to support her. "We've got your back," Fareed said with a grin. Just remember what you know, Professor Rana added, straightening his tie. Aisha nodded, touched by their presence. As she turned to enter the building, she caught sight of Imran Malik arriving in his luxury car, surrounded by lawyers. Their eyes met briefly across the plaza. He looked away first, turning to say something to his attorney. Aisha smiled slightly as she walked through the heavy courthouse doors. They still thought she was just a simple librarian in over her head. By the end of today, they would know better. By the end of today, they would regret ever having underestimated her. Courtroom 3 looked exactly as it had 2 weeks ago. The same polished wood, the same stern portraits on the walls, the same heavy atmosphere of power and authority. But this time, as Aisha took her seat, something was different. That something was her. She arranged her documents methodically on the table, each folder color-coded and labeled. She had arrived 45 minutes early to set up and center herself. Her supporters, Professor Rana, Farid, and the women, from school, sat in the row directly behind her, a small island of encouragement in the otherwise intimidating space. Imran Malik and his entourage arrived 15 minutes before the hearing, talking loudly and confidently. His lead attorney, Counselor Ahmad, glanced at Aisha's organized materials with a flicker of surprise that quickly vanished behind a mask of indifference. Malik himself barely looked in her direction, engrossed in conversation with a man Aisha recognized from photos as the city's deputy mayor. "All rise," called the court officer as the judge entered. It was the same judge from the preliminary hearing, Judge Tariq, his face just as stern, his manner just as brisk. "Case number 247, Malik versus Khan," announced the clerk. Continuation of proceedings. Judge Tariq settled into his chair and glanced at his docket. "I see both parties are present. Counselor Ahmad, has there been any movement toward a settlement in this matter?" Ahmad stood smoothly. "No, Your Honor. Ms. Khan has rejected our generous offer to settle for 50% of the claimed damages." The judge raised an eyebrow and looked at Aisha. "Ms. Khan, are you still representing yourself?" Aisha rose, her hands steady this time. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well. Counselor Ahmad, you may proceed with your case." Ahmad launched into a polished presentation, essentially repeating his arguments from the previous hearing but with added emphasis on expert testimonies. He called a civil engineer who testified about the water damage to Malik's property. He presented reports from a landscaper about the destroyed garden features. He showed more photographs of flooding and damage. Throughout his presentation, Aisha took notes, her face calm. She didn't interrupt or object, simply watched and listened. Malik's legal team interpreted her silence as resignation. Several times Ahmad made statements that weren't fully supported by their evidence, clearly expecting no challenge. When Ahmad finally concluded, Judge Tariq turned to Aisha. "Ms. Khan, your response?" Aisha stood and approached the bench with a confidence that caused several of Malik's team to exchange glances. "Thank you, Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I'd like to address Mr. Malik's claims systematically, if I may." The judge nodded, settling back in his chair with what appeared to be resignation, clearly expecting another fumbling amateur defense. Aisha placed her first folder on the document projector. "First, I'd like to address the physical impossibility of Mr. Malik's claim that water from my property damaged his drainage system." The projection showed a topographical map of their neighborhood, with property lines clearly marked. "As you can see, Your Honor, my property sits at an elevation of 217 meters, while Mr. Malik's property sits at 223 meters. She highlighted the measurements. "Water flows downhill, not uphill. My small garden renovation couldn't possibly have sent water flowing 6 meters upward to damage Mr. Malik's drainage system." She clicked to the next image, a rainfall analysis from the local meteorological department. Furthermore, the dates of damage cited by Mr. Malik coincide exactly with unprecedented rainfall that affected the entire region. The rain gauge at the municipal building recorded 341 millimeters of rainfall in a 48-hour period, the heaviest rainfall in 15 years. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Tariq leaned forward, suddenly interested. Your Honor, Aisha continued, Mr. Malik's property didn't flood because of my garden renovation. It flooded because his drainage system was inadequate and improperly installed. She changed to the next document, a building permit for Malik's mansion. According to Mr. Malik's own building permits, his drainage system was designed to handle maximum rainfall of 200 millimeters per day. The system failed because it was under-designed for our region's weather patterns. Ahmad jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Khan is not a qualified engineer. She can't possibly interpret these technical documents correctly. Judge Tariq looked at Aisha. Ms. Khan? Your Honor, I'm reading directly from the permit specifications that Mr. Malik's own company filed with the city. No interpretation is needed. She highlighted the relevant section on the projection. The judge nodded. Objection overruled. Continue. Ms. Khan. Aisha moved to her second folder. I'd now like to address a larger pattern that puts my case in context. She displayed a map showing Malik construction developments across the city, with certain areas highlighted in red. These red areas indicate Malik construction developments that have experienced drainage failures in the past 5 years. I've obtained public records of complaints filed with the Environmental Protection Agency. She displayed a chart showing dates, locations, and types of complaints. 27 separate households in 5 different Malik construction developments have reported similar drainage failures during heavy rains. Interestingly, 17 of these complaints were dropped after the homeowners signed confidentiality agreements. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even Malik had stopped looking at his phone and was watching Aisha with narrowed eyes. Your Honor, I'd like to present testimony from 3 former employees of Malik Construction who have direct knowledge of the company's drainage practices. Ahmad stood again. Objection. This is completely irrelevant to the specific case before us today. Your Honor, Aisha responded. It goes directly to the credibility of Mr. Malik's claim. He alleges my actions damaged his property. I am presenting evidence that his company has a pattern of installing defective drainage systems that fail during heavy rainfall. Exactly what happened in this case. Judge Tariq considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to this case, Ms. Khan. Aisha nodded and played a video deposition from Hassan, the former site manager now in Dubai. His face appeared on the screen, stating his name and former position. During my employment at Malik Construction from 2018 to 2021, I personally witnessed and was instructed to implement cost-cutting measures on drainage systems, Hassan stated clearly. This included substituting lower-grade PVC pipes than what was specified in the approved plans, reducing the diameter of drainage pipes by up to 20%, and decreasing the number of water collection points. Hassan held up documentation, purchase orders, design modifications, and internal emails. These changes were made after permits were approved and inspections were scheduled. We were explicitly told not to document these changes in the official plans. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Tariq banged his gavel once, and silence fell again. Aisha then presented notarized statements from 2 other former employees, confirming Hassan's account. One had included copies of the original drainage specifications and the modified ones actually used, showing dramatic differences in materials and design. Your Honor, Aisha said, turning to her third folder, I'd now like to address Mr. Malik's photographic evidence of water damage. She displayed side-by-side comparisons of the photos Malik's team had presented and satellite weather imagery from the dates in question. The damage shown in these photos occurred during the severe storms on May 7th and 8th, when rainfall exceeded 300 millimeters. My garden renovation wasn't even started until May 15th, a week after this damage occurred. Ahmad was on his feet again. Your Honor, Ms. Khan is manipulating the timeline. Our client has receipts showing when the damage occurred. Yes, receipts. Dated May 20th, Aisha responded calmly. But those are repair receipts, not documentation of when the damage occurred. The actual damage happened during the May 7th storms, as confirmed by Mr. Malik's own insurance claim. She displayed a copy of an insurance document with the date clearly visible. Judge Tariq was now fully engaged. looking back and forth between the documents and Malik's increasingly uncomfortable legal team. Furthermore, Aisha continued, I've obtained statements from 3 of Mr. Malik's neighbors who experienced similar flooding during the same storm. She presented the statements. All 3 confirm that drainage issues affected the entire hillside development, not just Mr. Malik's property. Ahmad looked increasingly agitated, whispering urgently with his colleagues and passing notes to Malik, who was now sitting upright, his face tense. Finally, Your Honor, Aisha said, opening her last folder, I'd like to address the most troubling aspect of this case. She displayed an environmental impact study of the area surrounding their neighborhood. This independent study conducted by the University Environmental Sciences Department shows that improper drainage from the Crown Heights development, currently being built by Malik Construction directly uphill from our properties, is causing water to be channeled incorrectly across the entire hillside. She zoomed in on a section of the map. The study specifically identifies poorly designed retention ponds and inadequate perimeter drainage at the Crown Heights construction site as the source of excessive water flow affecting all downhill properties. During heavy rains, the courtroom was utterly silent now, all eyes fixed on Aisha or the damning evidence on the screen. In conclusion, Your Honor, Aisha said, her voice steady and clear, the evidence shows that 1, it is physically impossible for my small garden to have caused water to flow uphill to Mr. Malik's property. 2, the damage to Mr. Malik's property occurred before my garden renovation even began. 3, Malik Construction has a documented history of installing substandard drainage systems. And 4, the actual source of flooding in our neighborhood is the Crown Heights development currently being constructed by Malik Construction. She gathered her materials and looked directly at the judge. I respectfully ask that this case be dismissed with prejudice, and that Mr. Malik be required to cover all costs associated with these proceedings. As she returned to her seat, the courtroom remained silent. Professor Rana nodded slightly, pride evident in his eyes. Across the aisle, Malik was engaged in intense whispered conversation with his legal team, their faces grim. Judge Tariq cleared his throat. This court will take a 30-minute recess to review the evidence presented. He banged his gavel and stood. As the judge left the courtroom, the silence broke into a buzz of conversation. Aisha sat quietly, breathing deeply, aware that the battle wasn't yet won, but knowing she had done everything possible to present the truth. Ahmad approached her table, his earlier arrogance replaced with stiff formality. Ms. Khan, my client would like to discuss a potential resolution before the judge returns. Aisha looked up at him, then past him to where Imran Malik waited, his expression unreadable. I'm listening, she said simply. Aisha followed Ahmad to a small conference room off the main hallway. Imran Malik was already seated at the head of the table, his fingers drumming impatiently on the polished wood. 2 junior lawyers flanked him, laptops open, ready to take notes. The room felt tense, the air heavy with unspoken calculations. Please sit. Ahmad gestured to a chair directly across from Malik. Aisha noticed it was slightly lower than the others around the table, a small psychological tactic that might have intimidated her 2 weeks ago. Now she simply adjusted it before sitting down, meeting Malik's gaze directly. Mr. Malik has authorized me to offer you a revised settlement, Ahmad began, sliding a document across the table. We're prepared to drop all claims against you if you'll sign this confidentiality agreement. Aisha picked up the paper and read it carefully. The agreement would require her to never speak about the case, destroy all evidence she had gathered, and withdraw any complaints or reports she might have filed with regulatory agencies. And if I refuse? She asked, setting the paper down. Ms. Khan, Malik spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and practiced. You've presented an interesting case today, but let's be realistic. This is one hearing in what could be years of legal proceedings. Do you really have the resources for that? He leaned forward slightly. I'm being generous here. My lawyers believe we can still win this case on technical grounds. The judge may be impressed by your amateur detective work, but ultimately, the legal system favors those who understand how to navigate it professionally. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Take the offer. Go back to your books and your quiet life. Aisha studied him for a moment. In another life, his intimidation tactics might have worked. But something had changed in her these past weeks. Something fundamental and unbreakable. "Mr. Malik," she replied calmly, "I understand the system better than you think." She pushed the confidentiality agreement back across the table. "I'm not interested in dropping this case. In fact, I'm preparing to expand it." The faintest flicker of concern crossed Malik's face. "Expand it? What are you talking about?" Aisha opened her portfolio and removed a document she had prepared the night before, but hadn't yet shown in court. "This is a draft of a class action lawsuit on behalf of 32 homeowners from 5 different Malik construction developments. All of them have experienced drainage failures similar to yours. All of them have documentation." She laid the document on the table. It was nearly 50 pages long, meticulously formatted with proper legal citations and exhibits. "While gathering evidence for my defense, I discovered something interesting. Many of your former customers wanted to speak out about their experiences, but were afraid of facing you alone. Together, they're not afraid anymore." The room went absolutely still. Malik's finger stopped its drumming. "You're bluffing," Ahmad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Preparing a class action takes months, teams of lawyers." "I've been working on it for 10 days, Aisha interrupted, "with help from some very motivated homeowners and a few legal professionals who believe in justice." She didn't mention that Professor Rana and 3 of his former students had worked late into the night, helping her format the document properly. "It's ready to file today." Malik snatched the document and flipped through it, his face darkening as he scanned the list of plaintiffs and allegations. The Khans from Emerald Villas? The Akhtar family from Lakeview? His voice rose slightly. "These cases were settled years ago. They signed agreements. Those agreements are void if they were based on fraudulent information," Aisha said. "Your company claimed these were isolated incidents caused by unusual circumstances. My evidence shows they were the result of systematic, cost-cutting and code violations, facts you deliberately concealed from these homeowners and from the courts." One of the junior lawyers whispered something to Ahmad, who frowned deeply. "Furthermore," Aisha continued, "I've prepared a separate filing for the Environmental Protection Agency detailing how the Crown Heights development is currently violating 6 different regulations regarding stormwater management. The university study I mentioned in court has already been submitted to their enforcement division." She held up her phone. "I'm waiting for confirmation that they've received it." The conference room fell silent again as the implications sank in. Malik stared at her, his earlier condescension replaced by cold calculation. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "3 things, Aisha replied without hesitation. "First, you withdraw your lawsuit against me completely and cover all associated costs. Second, you fix the drainage issues at Crown Heights properly according to code, verified by independent inspectors. Third, you establish a fund to repair damage to all affected properties in our neighborhood, not just yours." Malik laughed, but it sounded hollow. "And in return?" "In return, I'll consider not filing the class action today." Aisha kept her voice level. "But the homeowners will still need to be compensated eventually. This just gives you time to approach them with fair settlements instead of facing them in court." Ahmad leaned close to Malik, whispering urgently. Malik waved him away impatiently. "You're just a librarian," he said, a hint of his earlier arrogance returning. "You got lucky with a few documents and witnesses. My legal team will tear your class action apart." Aisha smiled slightly. "Perhaps, but the publicity alone will be problematic for your company, won't it? Especially with the Crown Heights project still in pre-sales. How many luxury homes will you sell once potential buyers learn about the drainage issues and the lawsuits?" That hit home. Crown Heights was Malik Construction's most ambitious project to date. Over 200 high-end homes advertised as the pinnacle of modern luxury living. The development had been featured in architectural magazines and was expected to establish Malik as a premier luxury developer nationally. "The media would love this story," Aisha continued quietly. "The little librarian taking on the powerful developer. All those families finally getting justice. The environmental violations exposed. It would make compelling headlines for weeks. Malik's expression hardened. He glanced at his watch and then at Ahmad. We need to get back to court. The judge will be returning. Think about my offer, Aisha said, gathering her materials. It's more generous than the one you made to me. As they filed out of the conference room, Aisha caught a glimpse of Professor Rana waiting in the hallway. He raised an eyebrow questioningly. She gave a small shake of her head. No settlement yet. Back in the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Judge Tariq returned promptly, his expression unreadable as he took his seat and adjusted his glasses. Having reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, he began, I find several aspects of this case troubling. He turned to Malik's legal team. Counselor Ahmad, Ms. Khan has raised significant questions about the timeline of the alleged damages and the physical possibility of her property being the cause. Do you have additional evidence to counter her claims? Ahmad stood, his usual smoothness slightly strained. Your Honor, we maintain that the defendant's actions contributed to the damage, but in the interest of court efficiency, we would like to request a continuance to review the new evidence presented today. The judge frowned. A continuance? Ms. Khan has presented evidence that appears to completely contradict your client's claims. Evidence that could have been discovered with due diligence before this case was ever filed. Ahmad cleared his throat. Your Honor, we believe there are technical aspects of the drainage patterns that require expert analysis. Your own experts have already testified, Judge Tariq interrupted, and Ms. Khan has effectively challenged their conclusions with documented evidence. He turned to Aisha. Ms. Khan, your response to the request for continuance? Aisha stood. Your Honor, I believe Mr. Malik's team is simply trying to delay the inevitable dismissal of this case. The evidence clearly shows that their claims against me are without merit. She paused, then added, however, I would not object to a short continuance if Mr. Malik uses that time to address the actual source of the drainage problems, namely, the inadequate stormwater management at the Crown Heights development that's affecting our entire neighborhood. Judge Tariq raised an eyebrow. Looking between Aisha and Malik's team, is this something your client would consider, Counselor Ahmad? Before Ahmad could respond, Malik himself rose to his feet. Your Honor, if I may address the court directly? The judge nodded. Malik Construction has always been committed to quality and community well-being, Malik said, his voice taking on the smooth, confident tone he used in his television commercials. If there are concerns about drainage at Crown Heights, we want to address them properly. I propose a 2-week continuance during which we will conduct a thorough review of the drainage systems and make any necessary improvements. Aisha fought to keep her expression neutral. This was Malik trying to save face, to make it look like his company was being proactive rather than forced into action. I believe that's a reasonable approach, the judge said. 2-week continuance granted. Mr. Malik, I expect a detailed report on the drainage improvements at the next hearing. He looked at Aisha. Ms. Khan, are you amenable to this arrangement? Yes, Your Honor, Aisha replied, with one addition. I would request that the court appoint an independent inspector to verify any work done at Crown Heights. Given the evidence I've presented about past practices, I believe this would ensure transparency. Malik's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded in agreement. So ordered, Judge Tariq said. Court-appointed inspector to verify all drainage work. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. He banged his gavel, ending the session. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Aisha found herself surrounded by her small group of supporters. Professor Rana squeezed her shoulder gently. Masterfully done, he said quietly. You've given him a chance to save face while forcing him to fix the real problem. It's not over yet, Aisha replied, watching as Malik and his entourage exited through a side door, avoiding the small cluster of reporters who had somehow heard about the case, and gathered outside the main entrance. No, the professor agreed. But you've changed the playing field completely. He came to bury you under legal fees and intimidation. Now he's scrambling to protect his reputation and his biggest project. As they walked out of the courthouse, Aisha noticed one of the homeowners from her neighborhood, Mrs. Rizvi, an elderly, widow whose basement had flooded 3 times since Crown Heights construction began. The woman gave Aisha a hopeful look. "Is it true?" Mrs. Rizvi asked. "Are they finally going to fix the drainage problems?" "They've promised to," Aisha said. "And this time, the court will be watching to make sure they do it properly." Mrs. Rizvi's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. None of us could fight him alone." "You're not alone anymore," Aisha assured her, suddenly understanding that her personal victory over Malik was just the beginning. There were dozens of people like Mrs. Rizvi who had suffered because of Malik's corrupt practices, people who needed someone to stand up for them. As she walked home, declining Farid's offer of a ride, Aisha felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she had experienced in years. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but she knew she had found her way back to something she had lost long ago. Not just her legal knowledge, but her belief that one person could make a difference against seemingly overwhelming odds. Her phone buzzed with a message from Professor Rana. "Malik's lawyer just called me. They want to meet tomorrow to discuss a comprehensive settlement. You've got them running scared." Aisha smiled as she typed her reply. "Tell them I'll be bringing the draft class action with me, just in case they need motivation to be generous." The OW. 2 weeks before the final hearing passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to the court order, heavy machinery appeared at the Crown Heights development the very next day. Workers in bright yellow vests swarmed over the hillside, digging trenches and installing large drainage pipes under the watchful eye of the court-appointed inspector, a no-nonsense civil engineer named Dr. Bakhtiar, who had taught at the Technical University for 30 years before retiring to consultancy work. Aisha visited the site several times, sometimes alone, sometimes with Professor Rana or homeowners from the neighborhood. Dr. Bakhtiar would greet her with respect, often pulling her aside to explain technical details of the new drainage system. "They're doing it properly now," he told her during one visit, pointing to the oversized retention ponds being excavated. "These will hold 3 times the water volume required by code. And look here." He indicated the thick, high-quality pipes being installed. "These aren't the cheap materials specified in their original plans. Malik is spending serious money this time." The settlement meeting with Malik's legal team had gone exactly as Aisha hoped. Faced with the prospect of a class action lawsuit and EPA investigation, Malik had agreed to all of Aisha's demands and more. Not only would he withdraw his lawsuit and fix the drainage issues, but he also established a substantial compensation fund for affected homeowners. The final agreement required him to hire independent inspectors for all future Malik construction projects to ensure compliance with environmental regulations. What Aisha hadn't expected was the attention her case began to attract. It started with a small article in the local newspaper about the drainage improvements at Crown Heights. A journalist had gotten wind of the court case that prompted the work and reached out to Aisha for comment. She had given only basic facts. But the resulting story, "Librarian takes on property tycoon and win," caught people's imagination. More reporters called. Homeowners from other Malik developments reached out with their stories. A popular morning show invited her to speak about standing up to corporate negligence. Aisha declined most interview requests, uncomfortable with the spotlight, but the story seemed to spread anyway. "You've become a bit of a folk hero," Farid told her with a grin as he showed her social media posts praising her courage. "People love stories about ordinary citizens taking on the powerful and winning." Aisha found the attention awkward but used the platform to direct focus toward the environmental and safety issues, not herself. When she did give occasional comments to journalists, she emphasized the importance of companies following regulations designed to protect communities. The morning of the final hearing dawned bright and clear. Aisha dressed carefully in a simple but elegant outfit, a teal shalwar kameez with minimal embroidery that her father had insisted on buying for her big day. "You look like your mother," he said softly as she came out of her room. "She would be so proud of you." The courthouse steps were more crowded than Aisha expected. Along with her usual supporters, several neighbors had come to witness the conclusion of the case that had impacted their community. A few reporters stood off to the side, notebooks ready. Aisha kept her head down, focusing on the task ahead rather than the unexpected attention. Inside, the courtroom was nearly full. Malik and his legal team were already seated, looking far less confident than they had at previous hearings. Ahmad nodded stiffly when Aisha entered, a reluctant acknowledgement of her as a worthy opponent rather than an amateur to be dismissed. Judge Tariq called the court to order promptly at 9 a.m. "We're here for the final hearing in case number 47, Malik versus Khan," he announced. "I understand there have been significant developments since our last session." Ahmad rose. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has completed comprehensive drainage improvements at the Crown Heights development, as verified by the court-appointed inspector. Additionally, I'm pleased to inform the court that the parties have reached a settlement agreement." He handed documents to the court clerk. The judge reviewed the papers carefully, occasionally glancing up at Malik, whose face remained impassive, despite the clear defeat the settlement represented. "Ms. Khan," Judge Tariq said finally, "you've reviewed this agreement? You find the terms acceptable?" Aisha stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The agreement addresses not only my specific case but also the broader issues affecting our neighborhood. I believe it serves the interests of justice and community safety." The judge nodded, seeming pleased. "Very well. Based on the settlement agreement and the dismissal of claims, this case is officially closed." He banged his gavel, then added, "I would like to commend both parties for finding a resolution that addresses the underlying problems, rather than merely settling the immediate dispute." Everyone rose as the judge exited. The formalities were over, but Aisha knew this was really just the beginning of something new. Outside the courtroom, Dr. Bakhtiar approached her with an extended hand. "Impressive work, Ms. Khan. Not just the legal victory, but the way you leveraged it to ensure proper engineering standards. We need more people like you bridging the gap between law and technical fields." Aisha thanked him, surprised when he handed her his business card. "If you ever want to consult on other cases involving engineering standards, please call me. I mean it." She was even more surprised when Ahmad separated from Malik's group and walked over to her. "That was unexpected," he said, his tone professional, but lacking the condescension of their earlier interactions. "Where did you learn to litigate like that? Your presentation was more thorough than many lawyers I've faced." "I studied law for 3 years before life took me in a different direction," Aisha replied simply. Ahmad raised an eyebrow. "Only 3 years? You might consider finishing your degree. Our firm is always looking for associates who can think on their feet." He handed her his card with a slight smile. "Just something to consider." Aisha accepted the card politely, though she had already been thinking along different lines about her future. The courthouse steps were even more crowded as they exited. A small cheer went up from the gathered neighbors when they saw Aisha. Mrs. Rizvi pushed forward to hug her tightly. "They've already started fixing the drainage behind my house," the elderly woman said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "No more sleepless nights worrying about rain." Others shared similar stories. Basements that would now stay dry, gardens that could be replanted, property values that would stop declining. Aisha was moved by how much this meant to people she'd barely known before the case. A young woman pushed through the crowd, a reporter from the city's largest newspaper. "Ms. Khan, what does this victory mean for other communities facing similar issues with developers?" Aisha hesitated, uncomfortable with the framing of the question. "This wasn't about winning or losing," she said carefully. "It was about ensuring that regulations designed to protect all of us are properly followed. The laws exist for good reasons, to keep our homes safe, our water clean, our communities healthy. Sometimes we just need to remind powerful interests of that fact." The reporter seemed pleased with this response, jotting it down quickly. "There's talk that other neighborhoods affected by questionable construction practices are considering similar actions. Would you be willing to help them?" Before Aisha could answer, Professor Rana stepped forward. "Ms. Khan has demonstrated exceptional legal aptitude in this case. I believe she has a bright future ahead, whatever path she chooses." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Aisha found herself walking home with her father and the professor, discussing possibilities she hadn't considered in years. The university would welcome you back to complete your degree, Professor Rana said. With credits for your practical experience in this case, you could finish in a year. And then what? Aisha asked. Join a big firm like Ahmad suggested? Isak. Professor shook his head. I was thinking something more aligned with what you've just accomplished. There's a real need for lawyers who understand both the legal and technical aspects of environmental regulations, someone who can help ordinary people stand up to corporate negligence. A community legal advocate, Aisha mused, warming to the idea. Exactly. The law school has been discussing a community legal clinic focusing on environmental justice. They need someone to lead it, someone who understands both the legal complexities and the human impact. Her father, who had been listening quietly, squeezed her arm gently. Your mother always said you were meant for something special. I think she imagined you helping people through books, but perhaps it was meant to be through the law instead. 3 months later, Aisha sat in a small office on the university campus. The sign on the door read, Environmental Justice Legal Clinic, and, underneath, Aisha Khan, Director. The space was modest but bright, with bookshelves lining one wall and a conference table where community members could gather to discuss their cases. She was still working part-time at the school library. She couldn't bear to leave the children and their stories completely. But 3 days a week, she helped ordinary citizens navigate the complex legal and technical challenges of environmental regulations. With each case, she built a stronger network of experts, advocates, and community leaders committed to holding powerful interests accountable. On her desk sat a framed news clipping from the day after the final hearing. The headline read, Justice Prevails. How One Woman's Stand Changed a Community. Aisha kept it not out of pride, but as a reminder that systems only work when people are brave enough to use them properly. Her phone rang. A neighborhood association from across the city, concerned about water quality issues near a new factory. As Aisha listened to their story, she opened her notebook and began taking notes, asking precise questions that would help her understand both the legal and technical dimensions of their problem. This was where she belonged, not fighting for herself, but helping others fight for themselves. The courtroom where she had once been humiliated had become the place where she discovered her true purpose. And the skills she had buried for years had become tools for bringing justice to those who needed it most. As she scheduled a meeting with the neighborhood representatives, Aisha reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The path ahead would be challenging. Powerful interests rarely yielded without a fight, but she was no longer afraid of those challenges. She had discovered something important about herself and the world. Sometimes the most effective force for change isn't the loudest voice or the most powerful position, but the quiet determination of someone who knows they're standing on the side of truth.